Hi everyone, so I'm just going to quickly show you how to use the circle. So the unit circle, think of it as an ancient calculator. Okay, it has a lot of information in it. All you need to do is know how to retrieve it. So basically there are two ways to use the circle. You can find sine or cos, just like the calculator can give it to you. It's the same thing. You can find sine or cos as long as you have an angle to work with. Or the opposite. You can find the angle as long as you have sine or cos to work with. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a few examples. So first I will do the first type. Okay, so examples of, we'll call it topic one, or this here. I'll do three. What is the sine of pi over 3? Yeah, sometimes I use brackets, sometimes I don't. It doesn't really matter. That's all. So that's what you do. You have to know that the angles are on the inside and the values of cos and sine are on the outside. I know this is a little bit small, so maybe you can follow my voice, but in the other video, you know that the values repeat. Okay, so there's not too many values that I'll be referring to. So angle on the inside, pi over 3, I'll just put a dot, is right there. X is cosine, y is sine. So the sine of pi over 3, yes, pi over 3 is root 3 over 2. Next, what is the cosine of pi over 4? So here I won't use examples, okay? It's the same thing. The value that follows a trigonometric ratio is always referring to an angle. This is always an angle. So I'll just show you. This is the same as saying, what is the cosine of 45 degrees? Okay? Yes, your calculator will give it to you as something like this, but I'm using a unit circle. Angle on the inside, pi over 4 is right there. Cosine, actually the fourths are always easy in terms of the value. It's just the sign. Okay, so anything that ends with a 4, you know the answer is pi over 2. Square root of 2 over 2. It's just the sign. Now, just to get acquainted with the circle, remember that it's the Cartesian graph, so it's the same directions. So if you're looking for a negative y, you would look down here. If you were looking for a positive x, you would look over here. Okay, so I don't know if you see my cursor moving. I just don't want to write on it because then I can't erase it. Okay, so let's do one more. The cosine of 11 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6 is here. Cosine is first. The square root of 3 over 2. And the last one, let's do the sine of pi over 2. Pi over 2 is here. The sine is the second value. The sine is 1. So I'll just remind you, in a trigonometric point, x is cosine, y is sine. So the way I remember it, alphabetically. So x before y, c before s. Okay, so the first coordinate is always cosine. The second coordinate is always sine. Okay, so since you can always pause the video and start over, I will now, because I'm a little bit limited in the technology that I'm just using Paint, so I want to keep my unit circle on the page. I just erased the value, but that's okay. And I want to just go over the second way to use the unit circle. It's gotta be a better way, but we're just okay, you can always forward this part. Okay, so the second way, there's another color here, red. You have to, okay, so you have to now find the angle. So there are 16 angles here. The answer is going to be one of these 16. We're not just going to guess. We're going to use the clue about their sine or cosine. So for example, I'm looking for an angle. Luckily, there are not infinitely many choices because the sine must be half. So remember, sine is the y value. So this is referring to a y value. I look on my circle. The y values are positive, so they're only going to be at the top. And I see a y value of a half over here and a y value of a half over here, which means that the y values led me to my angle. So it's like a clue. So the angle is no longer unknown. And in fact, there are two possibilities for the angle. Okay, so let's do another example. The cosine of this angle is negative square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so cosine is now x. It's an x value and it's negative. So you should try to prepare yourself. Negative x values will be on the negative side, right, of the x-axis. So what are the possible values for my angle? Possible values for my angle are 3 pi over 4. So let me just use another color here, right? So I was looking for an x value of negative square root of 2 over 2, which led me to my answers. 3 pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. Okay, and that's basically it. I guess I'll do one more example. I'll say, let's look for the sine of an angle that is -1. Okay, so there's some values that have one possible answer, and some values that have two answers, and some that have none. So I'll quickly go over one that has none. So just sine is y. So the only angle that has a y value of -1 is 3 pi over 2. Okay, and I just want you to keep in mind how the ratios work. The cosine and sine values, the cosine of the angle is always a value between -1 and 1. Okay, so I'm probably not writing this right, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And the sine of an angle only fluctuates between -1 and 1. Okay, so I'm just going to show you here on a graph. Well, this now is the function, but I just wanted to show you this way. You cannot have a sine value greater than 1 or less than -1. Just keep that in mind. But the unit circle would not give you a value greater than 1 or less than -1. Okay, so I went off the page, but that doesn't really matter. I was just going over that. And then maybe I'll just do an example D right here. If I said the sine of my angle is √2 over 3, for example, right? If you around the unit circle, this is not on the unit circle, not on the unit circle. So I'm just quickly going to go over, oh boy, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Guess I won't save. I just quickly wanted to go over that fact. So for example, here, let me start over here. If I'm giving you a sign, here, let's go with this example instead of the radical. So you have to look around the unit circle. You'll see that this value is not on the unit circle. But it doesn't mean that the angle doesn't exist. So when you don't recognize the value on the unit circle, because remember, on the unit circle, it's very repetitive. It's one of these values, correct? What you do is you have to use your calculator. In radians, oh boy, I wasn't ready for that one. Okay, so in radians, and of course, oh yeah, here are my calculators in radians. The sine inverse, so this is saying I don't know the angle, but I know the inverse is 0.25 radians. Okay, so we don't have pi. So usually keep in mind, unit circle, the angles are exact. There's always a pi in their value, but it's still, the angle is always in radians. From the calculator, your angle is usually some form of a decimal, but always the unit is radians. Okay, so I hope this helped. There's a lot of videos, other videos you can look at. There was other stuff posted on the classroom, and of course, you can email me.